You can't park that thing here, she screeched, her voice a weapon designed to shatter the morning peace. I was just getting started on the story of how my quiet retirement project turned into a full-scale war against a neighborhood tyrant, a woman who weaponized bylaws and wielded her HOA presidency like a monarch's scepter. If you enjoy stories about bullies getting exactly what they deserve, stick around. You might be wondering what you would do in my shoes. It all started with a simple plan. I had recently taken ownership of my father's house, a place I'd helped him build on the outskirts of a growing town. After 30 years as a structural engineer, designing bridges and skyscrapers, I was ready for something smaller, something personal. My project was to restore his old fishing boat, a classic wooden skiff that had been sitting in storage for a decade. To do that, I needed a place to work, so I bought a 20-foot enclosed utility trailer, my mobile workshop, and parked it on the gravel access strip that ran alongside my property. Little did I know, that simple act was like planting a flag on disputed territory, and the self-appointed queen of that territory was about to declare war. Her name was Brenda, and she lived under the mistaken impression that the world was her personal kingdom, and the HOA was her royal court. The house was more than just wood and nails to me, it was a legacy. My father, a carpenter by trade and an engineer by nature, had designed and built it himself. It sat on a generous acre at the very end of a cul-de-sac in a development called Willow Creek Estates. When he bought the land 40 years ago, it was just a plot of dirt at the end of a county road. Over the years, the town grew, and a developer bought the surrounding farmland, creating the manicured, cookie-cutter suburb that now encircled my father's original plot. As a condition of the development, the county required the builder to provide access to my father's property. They did this by creating a 10-foot wide gravel lane that branched off the main asphalt road of the cul-de-sac and ran along the edge of my property line. It was a recorded private easement, established for the sole purpose of ingress and egress to my land. It was, for all legal intents and purposes, part of my property rights. I knew this because I had reviewed the original deeds and the plat maps from the county clerk's office myself. It was as clear as a blueprint. I was a quiet man. My wife had passed a few years prior, and my kids were grown and gone. The silence of the house was a comfortable companion. My days were spent poring over my father's old schematics for the boat, organizing his workshop, and enjoying the simple pleasure of not having a deadline. I wanted peace, a quiet place to grieve and to build something with my hands, just as he had. Willow Creek Estates, with its manicured lawns and identical mailboxes, seemed like the perfect, if slightly boring, place for it. Then I met Brenda. She was the HOA president, a title she wore like a military decoration. She was a woman in her late 50s with a helmet of lacquered blonde hair and eyes that seemed to be permanently narrowed in disapproval. She moved through the neighborhood with the self-important strut of a general reviewing her troops. Her first interaction with me had been a passive-aggressive note left on my door about the height of my grass, which was, I measured, 1/4 of an inch over the prescribed limit. I mowed it without complaint. I wasn't looking for trouble. The trailer was a different story. It was my sanctuary, my workspace. It was parked neatly on the gravel easement, not touching the pristine asphalt of the HOA-controlled street, not blocking any driveways, and certainly not violating any of the covenants I'd bothered to read. The rules mentioned vehicles parked on community roads, but the easement wasn't a community road. It was mine. That first confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning. I was outside, running an extension cord from my garage to the trailer, when her minivan screeched to a halt in the middle of the street. She launched herself out of the driver's seat, a clipboard clutched in her hand like a weapon. "Excuse me," she barked, marching onto my lawn. "I am Brenda Miller, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." "Frank," I said, offering a hand she pointedly ignored. "Frank, you are in violation of Section 7, Paragraph B of the Community Covenants," she announced, tapping her clipboard. "No trailers, campers, or commercial vehicles are to be parked within the community for more than 24 hours. I kept my voice even. "I appreciate you letting me know, Brenda. However, this trailer isn't parked in the community. It's on my private access easement." A flicker of confusion crossed her face before being replaced by pure, unadulterated condescension. She laughed, a short, sharp sound like a dog's bark. "Private what? Honey, this is all Willow Creek. That little dirt path is HOA property, and you are violating the rules." "I'm afraid you're mistaken," I said calmly. I've reviewed the property deeds and the county plat maps. This is a deeded easement for my property. It's legally distinct from the HOA's common areas. Her face flushed a blotchy red. It was clear she wasn't used to being contradicted, especially not with facts. Her entire power structure was built on the assumption that nobody else read the fine print. I don't care what your maps say, she spat, the word dripping with disdain. I am the president, and I am telling you that this road belongs to the HOA. You have 24 hours to move that eyesore, or I will have it towed at your expense. And you'll be receiving a $200 fine in the mail. Good day. She spun on her heel and marched back to her minivan, leaving me standing in my driveway, the extension cord still in my hand. The air buzzed with the static of her aggression. I wasn't angry yet, just surprised. The sheer, unshakable confidence of her ignorance was almost impressive. It was like arguing with someone who insisted the sky was green. I sighed and went back to my work. I assumed a simple letter, perhaps with a copy of the deed, would clear this all up. I was a man of logic, of proof. I believed that if you presented people with the facts, they would adjust their position accordingly. It was a foundational principle of engineering, of science, of rational thought. I had yet to learn that Brenda's world was not bound by the laws of logic or legal precedent. It was bound by one thing and one thing only, her will. And I had just become the first major obstacle to it. The next day, a crisp white envelope was taped to my front door. Inside was an official-looking violation notice from the HOA, citing the rule she'd mentioned, complete with a $200 fine. There was a handwritten note at the bottom in aggressive, loopy cursive, "This is your final warning." I chuckled, shaking my head. It was absurd. I spent the afternoon drafting a polite, formal letter to the HOA board. In it, I calmly explained the legal status of the easement. I attached a copy of the relevant section of my property deed and a highlighted printout of the county plat map, clearly showing the easement designated as private access for Lot 1. I mailed it via certified mail, just to be sure. Check and mate, I thought. For a week, I heard nothing. The silence was unnerving. I worked on the boat in my trailer, sanding down the old varnish, feeling the history of the wood under my fingertips. My neighbor, a retired police detective named George, came over one afternoon while I was working. He was a good man, quiet and observant. "Having a bit of a tiff with Queen Brenda, I hear," he said, leaning against the trailer. "You could say that," I replied. "She seems to think my easement is her personal driveway." George grunted. "Sounds about right. She runs this place like a gulag. Finds people if their garden gnomes are non-conforming. You want my advice? Be careful. She doesn't just get mad, she gets even." His words were more prophetic than I could have imagined. The following Monday morning, I woke up, made my coffee, and looked out the kitchen window. The spot on the gravel easement where my trailer had been sitting was empty. Just 2 faint indentations in the gravel marked where it had been. My coffee cup clattered in the sink. A cold, heavy feeling settled in my stomach. It wasn't just a trailer. It was $30,000 of tools, custom materials for the boat restoration, and, most importantly, my peace of mind. She had actually done it. She had towed my property off my land. The escalation had begun. And as I stood there, staring at the empty space, I felt a shift inside me. The peace-seeking engineer was receding, and in his place, something colder and more methodical was taking root. Brenda had mistaken my patience for weakness. She had ignored my facts and trampled my rights. She had just made the biggest mistake of her petty, tyrannical life. She had declared war on an engineer, and I was about to design her complete and total destruction. My first call was to the sheriff's department. I reported the trailer as stolen. The dispatcher was polite but unhelpful once I mentioned the HOA. "Sir, if it was an HOA-authorized tow, it's a civil matter, not a criminal one," she said in a tired voice. She gave me the number for the towing company the HOA had on contract, Brenda's Buddies Towing, or something equally ridiculous. The actual name was Miller's Towing and Recovery, the same last name as our dear HOA president. The first red flag went up, flapping lazily in my mind. I called the company. A gruff man answered. Yes, they had my trailer. Yes, it was towed on the authority of the Willow Creek HOA. The impound fees were $300 per day, plus a $500 special equipment towing fee. To get it back, I'd need to pay the current balance, $800, in cash and provide proof of ownership. It was illegally towed from my private property, I stated, keeping my voice level. The man on the phone laughed. That's what they all say, pal. You got a problem, take it up with your HOA. You want your trailer, bring cash, he hung up. This was no longer just an overreach of power, it was organized theft. Brenda wasn't just a bully, she was a crook. This realization was the turning point. Before, I wanted to reason with her. Now, I wanted to dismantle her. My objective changed from defense to offense. I wasn't just going to get my trailer back, I was going to make sure Brenda Miller never held a position of power over anyone ever again. I called my lawyer, explained the situation, and forwarded him the documents. He confirmed what I already knew, the tow was illegal, a clear case of trespassing and conversion of property. He could write a strongly worded letter, file a suit, and we'd likely win in a year or two after thousands in legal fees. Or, I said, my mind already working, we could let her dig her own grave a little deeper. My lawyer paused. What do you have in mind, Frank? I'm an engineer, I said. I solve problems. This is a structural problem. Brenda's power base is a poorly designed building. I'm just going to find the load-bearing walls and take them out. The first step in any engineering project is to gather data. I needed to understand the entire system I was up against. I spent the next week in full reconnaissance mode. I paid the $800 in cash to get my trailer back, documenting the entire transaction with a hidden camera in my shirt button. I made sure to get a receipt, which proudly displayed the Miller's Towing logo. The connection was too obvious to be a coincidence. Next, I dove into the HOA's governing documents, which were available online through the county portal. I read every single line of the covenants, the bylaws, the meeting minutes for the past 5 years. It was as tedious as reviewing concrete composition reports, but just as necessary. I was looking for weaknesses, inconsistencies, and procedural violations. I found them. Lots of them. Brenda, in her arrogance, had been running the HOA like her own personal fiefdom. The board meetings were barely documented. Votes were often recorded as unanimous without listing the attending members. And most interestingly, the contract with Miller's Towing had been approved without a competitive bidding process, a direct violation of the HOA's own bylaws for any contract over $5,000 a year. The contract was signed by Brenda Miller on behalf of the HOA, and the listed owner of the towing company was a man named Dale Miller. Her husband. This was more than just a red flag, it was a fireworks display. She was using HOA funds, our money, to pay her husband's company to harass residents. I cross-referenced the towing company's business license with the state. Dale was the sole proprietor. Their business address was the same as their home address. I felt a grim satisfaction. This wasn't just a conflict of interest, it was textbook embezzlement. She was fining residents and then channeling that money directly into her own family's pockets through illegal tows and inflated fees. My case was no longer just about a trailer on an easement. It was about fraud. My neighbor George proved to be an invaluable asset. I showed him my findings one evening over a beer on his back porch. He whistled softly as he looked over the documents. Frank, this is big, he said, his old cop instincts kicking in. This isn't just a civil case anymore. This is criminal. Conflict of interest, mail fraud if she sent those notices through the post, wire fraud if she used email. You've got the beginnings of a real racketeering case here. So what's my next move? I asked. Keep digging, but do it quietly, he advised. She thinks she's won. She thinks you're just another resident she's steamrolled. Let her think that. The more rope you give a person like her, the more spectacularly she'll hang herself. Document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every fine. Set up cameras. I took his advice to heart. The next day, I installed 4 high-definition, motion-activated security cameras around my property. 2 were visible, a clear deterrent. 2 were hidden, one disguised as a birdhouse pointed directly at the easement, and another small one inside my mailbox, aimed at the street. If she or her husband set foot on my property again, I'd have it on video. My strategic plan began to form, a multi-phase project with a single goal, poetic justice. Phase 1 was complete, data acquisition. Phase 2 was baiting the trap. I needed Brenda to overplay her hand in a way that was undeniably and publicly documented. So, after retrieving my trailer, I did something she would never expect. I parked it right back in the exact same spot on the easement. It was a declaration. A quiet, defiant act. I was daring her to make the next move. I knew she was watching. I could feel her eyes on my house from behind her perfectly clean windows across the street. The bait was in the water, and I knew a predator like Brenda wouldn't be able to resist. The reaction was faster than I expected. Less than an hour after I parked the trailer, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the official HOA account, but the tone was pure Brenda. Mr. Frank, the email began, dripping with false formality. It has come to my attention that the non-compliant vehicle has been returned to HOA property. This is a direct and willful violation of the warning you have already received. The fine has now been doubled to $400, and an additional $100 per day penalty is being assessed. Remove the vehicle immediately, or it will be impounded again. I smiled. She was taking the bait beautifully. I replied with a simple, polite email. Dear Ms. Miller and the HOA board, I wrote. As per my previous correspondence, the vehicle is located on my legally recorded private easement and is not on HOA property. Therefore, no violation has occurred. Any attempt to enter my property or tamper with my vehicle will be considered trespassing and reported to the authorities. All future communication on this matter should be directed to my legal counsel. I CC'd my lawyer. It was a small move, but a significant one. It was a signal that I was no longer playing her little game by her imaginary rules. I was moving the contest to a different arena, one with actual laws and consequences. Her response came within minutes. It was a masterpiece of hysterical rage. The professional facade crumbled, revealing the screeching tyrant beneath. All caps, multiple exclamation points, threats of legal action, liens on my property, and public shaming. She accused me of being a disruptive element and intentionally trying to lower property values. I saved a PDF of the entire email chain. Every word was another nail she was hammering into her own coffin. The next few days were a war of attrition. Every morning, a new violation notice was taped to my door. Grass height. A supposed oil stain on the easement gravel. The color of my welcome mat. Each came with $100 fine. It was comical in its absurdity. My hidden mailbox camera captured her personally taping each notice to my door, a scowl etched on her face. She was trespassing every single time. The community Facebook group, which she moderated with an iron fist, became her propaganda wing. Posts appeared about new residents who refused to respect our community standards. While my name wasn't used, the references to a large, ugly white trailer made it obvious who she was targeting. Comments from a few of her loyal cronies chimed in with support. Most residents, however, remained silent. I could feel their fear. They knew her wrath was a force of nature, and no one wanted to be its next target. I never responded online. I simply screen captured everything. The case file on my laptop was growing daily. It was a meticulous catalog of her harassment, a digital monument to her hubris. The trap was set. Now I needed to spring it. The annual HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. It was the perfect venue. It was public, it was official, and she would be at the height of her power, sitting in front of the very people she was swindling. I spent the time preparing my presentation. It wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. It was going to be a calm, methodical demolition. I compiled all the evidence into a clear, concise slideshow: the deed, the plat map, the illegal towing receipt with her husband's company name, the bylaws she had violated, the email threats, the video of her trespassing. I also prepared a financial analysis, estimating how much money Miller's Towing had likely received from the HOA over the past 5 years based on the number of similar complaints I saw mentioned in old meeting minutes. The number was staggering. It was well over $50,000. George reviewed my plan. "It's good," he said, nodding slowly. "But you need a knockout punch. Something that makes it impossible for anyone to side with her." Right now, it's your word and your documents against her. She'll just call you a liar and have her cronies shout you down. He was right. I needed something more. I needed an insider. I needed a whistleblower. But how? The answer came from an unexpected source. A few days before the meeting, a young man, probably early 20s, knocked on my door. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder towards Brenda's house. "Are you Frank?" he asked quietly. "I am," I said. "My name is Kevin," he said, extending a clammy hand. "Kevin Miller. Brenda is my mother." I kept my expression neutral, though my mind was racing. I invited him inside. He sat awkwardly on the edge of my sofa, refusing a drink. I know what my mom is doing," he stammered. "The trailer, the fines. She's been like this for years, but it's getting worse. She and my dad, they talk about it like it's a business. They call it community enforcement revenue." My blood ran cold. He had just given their scheme a name. "She's obsessed," Kevin continued, his voice cracking. "She thinks she's untouchable. I heard her on the phone with my dad, laughing about you, calling you an old fool. They're planning to have your trailer towed again, the night before the HOA meeting, just to humiliate you." He paused and took a deep breath. "That's not even the worst part. I was using her computer to do my homework, and I found a folder. It's labeled HOA Finances. It's all there. A separate ledger. The real one. It shows kickbacks from the landscaping company, the pool service, and my dad's towing company. They're skimming thousands of dollars a month from the HOA fees." He pulled a flash drive from his pocket and placed it on my coffee table as if it were a live grenade. "It's all on here," he whispered. "The ledgers, scanned invoices, emails between her and the contractors. I'm sorry. I can't stand by and watch her do this anymore. She's destroying the community, and she's destroying our family." This was it. This was the knockout punch George had talked about. It was the final, irrefutable proof. I looked at this brave young man, who was risking his relationship with his parents to do the right thing. "You've done a very courageous thing, Kevin," I said. "Thank you." He just nodded, a look of profound sadness on his face, and left as quietly as he came. The night before the HOA meeting, just as Kevin had warned, the tow truck from Miller's Towing and Recovery pulled up. My high-definition camera, nestled in the birdhouse, captured everything in crystal-clear detail. Dale Miller himself got out, a stout, unpleasant-looking man who was the spitting image of an older, more brutish Brenda. He didn't even bother to hook it up properly. He and another man attached a winch, dragged my trailer off the gravel, scraping the side against my fence post, and hauled it away. The whole process was sloppy, damaging, and beautifully documented. They had just committed property damage and theft, again, on camera. I didn't call the police. Not yet. The final act of this play was set for the community center stage, and I didn't want anything to spoil the premiere. The community center was a sterile, beige room filled with uncomfortable folding chairs. About 30 residents were there, a mix of disgruntled homeowners and Brenda's loyal sycophants. Brenda and the two other board members, a nervous-looking man and a woman who looked bored, sat at a long table at the front. Brenda was beaming, radiating a smug, victorious energy. She clearly believed my absence, and the absence of my trailer, was a sign of my surrender. The meeting droned on with the usual business, landscaping budgets, pool maintenance schedules. Brenda presided over it all with an air of regal authority. Finally, she reached the agenda item for new business. "Does anyone have any new business to bring before the board?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to speak. Slowly, I raised my hand. A flicker of surprise, then irritation, crossed her face. "Yes, Frank," she said, her voice tight. "The resident from Lot 1. I walked to the front of the room, carrying my laptop. "Thank you, Madam President," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I do have a matter of some importance to discuss. It concerns community property, financial transparency, and multiple violations of our bylaws and state law." A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's smile tightened. "This is not the forum for personal grievances. If you have a complaint, you can submit it in writing." "Oh, this is not a personal grievance," I replied, connecting my laptop to the projector. This is a community presentation. And I have everything in writing and on video. The first image flashed onto the screen behind her, a high-resolution satellite photo of my property, with the easement clearly outlined in red. Let's begin with the concept of property lines, I said. My voice filled the suddenly silent room. I walked them through it, step by logical step. I presented the plat map from the county. I showed them the section of my deed granting the easement. I explained, in simple terms, that the gravel strip was, and always had been, my private property. Therefore, I concluded that section, any HOA action taken on this strip of land, such as issuing fines or towing vehicles, constitutes trespassing. I clicked to the next slide. It was a crystal clear still from my security camera of Brenda taping a violation notice to my door. Exhibit A, the HOA president trespassing on private property. Brenda shot to her feet. This is an outrage. You have been filming me. That's illegal. Actually, it's not, I said coolly, not taking my eyes off the audience. There is no expectation of privacy on my front porch. Now, if you'll please let me continue, I clicked again. The receipt from Miller's Towing filled the screen, the $500 towing fee circled in red. As many of you know, my trailer was towed from my property 2 weeks ago. This is the bill I had to pay to retrieve my property. The company, as you can see, is Miller's Towing and Recovery. I paused for effect. The owner of which is Dale Miller, the husband of our HOA president, Brenda Miller. Gasps rippled through the room. People were starting to sit up straighter, looking from the screen to Brenda, whose face had gone from red to a pasty white. This is a clear conflict of interest, explicitly forbidden by our own bylaws, I continued, my voice like a hammer striking a nail. Bylaw 14, Section C, requires a competitive bidding process for all contracts. There was no such process for this exclusive, and very lucrative, towing contract. Lies. Slander. Brenda shrieked, her composure shattering like cheap glass. My husband provides a valuable service to this community. He certainly provides a service to you, I retorted. I then played the video from the night before. The entire room watched in stunned silence as Dale Miller and his crony carelessly dragged my trailer away, scraping it against my fence. The sound of the metal screeching was loud in the quiet room. This is footage from last night, I announced. Showing the president's husband committing property damage and theft, for the second time, from my land. I wonder how many others in this room have had their vehicles towed by Miller's Towing. How many have paid these inflated, cash-only fees? A few hands went up tentatively in the audience. An elderly woman spoke up. They towed my grandson's car last Christmas. Said it was parked on the street for more than 48 hours. It cost me almost $1,000 to get it back. Brenda was losing control. Her power was built on a foundation of bluff and intimidation, and I was systematically removing every support. This meeting is over, she yelled, banging a tiny gavel on the table. Not quite, I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone's focus back to me. Because it gets worse. I clicked to the final slide. It was a screenshot of the secret ledger Kevin had given me. It showed a column labeled, HOA dues, another labeled, official payouts, and a third, damning column labeled, B.M. diversions, next to payments for, Miller's Towing, Green Leaf Landscaping, and, Crystal Pool Service. There were entries in the diversions column. Kickbacks. Skimmed money. This, I said, letting the word hang in the air, is a copy of the HOA's real financial ledger, kept on the president's personal computer. It details a systematic scheme of embezzlement and kickbacks totaling, by my conservative estimate, over $100,000 over the last 3 years. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting questions, pointing fingers at Brenda. She stood there, speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, all directed at me. It's all here, I said, holding up the flash drive Kevin had given me. Copies of the ledgers, incriminating emails between Brenda and the vendors, doctored invoices. Everything needed for a full criminal investigation. As if on cue, the doors at the back of the room opened. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies and a plainclothes detective stepped inside. My neighbor George was with them, pointing towards the front table. The detective walked calmly down the aisle. "Brenda Miller?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Brenda stared at him, her eyes wide with panic and disbelief. Who are you?" "I'm Detective Harding with the county's Economic Crimes Unit," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." Her final, desperate act was one of pure, impotent rage. As the detective cuffed her hands behind her back, she lunged towards me, a wild animal cornered and trapped. You ruined everything," she screamed, her voice raw. "I'll get you for this. You'll pay. You'll never be safe here." The deputies pulled her back easily. Her threats were hollow, the pathetic last gasps of a dethroned tyrant. They led her out of the room, past the stunned faces of the neighbors she had bullied and stolen from for years. Her husband, Dale, who had been waiting in the parking lot, was arrested as well, leaning against his tow truck. The room was silent for a moment, and then it was as if a spell had been broken. People started talking, hugging, and some were even crying with relief. They crowded around me, shaking my hand, thanking me. I wasn't a hero. I was just a man who had been pushed too far, a man who had the skills to push back. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Brenda and her cronies removed, an emergency election was held. A new HOA board was voted in, led by a reasonable retired accountant who promised full transparency. The first order of business was to terminate the contracts with all the companies involved in Brenda's kickback scheme. They also voted to dissolve all the ridiculous, petty fines Brenda had levied over the years and refund the money to the residents. The community, freed from her oppressive rule, began to heal. People started talking to each other again. The neighborhood felt lighter, friendlier. Brenda and Dale Miller faced the full force of the law. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had provided, the videos, the financial records from the flash drive, and the testimony of several other vendors who flipped on them for a lighter sentence, they had no choice but to plead guilty. Brenda was sentenced to 5 years in state prison for felony embezzlement and fraud. Dale got 2 years for his part in the scheme. They were forced to pay full restitution to the HOA, which bankrupted them. Their house went into foreclosure, and the last I heard, they had moved out of state in disgrace. The community insisted on paying my legal fees and the damages to my trailer, but I declined. Getting my peace back was payment enough. With the new board's blessing, I finished the restoration of my father's boat in my trailer, parked peacefully on my own private easement. The quiet hum of my sander was the only sound that filled the air, no longer interrupted by the screech of a tyrant's voice. Sometimes, when I'm out on the lake in that boat, the sunlight glinting off the freshly varnished wood, I think about the whole ordeal. It's a testament to a simple truth: bullies derive their power from the silence and fear of their victims. They operate on the assumption that no one will ever bother to read the fine print, to check the facts, or to stand up and say no. I didn't set out to be a giant slayer. I just wanted to be left alone. But when my peace was threatened, I used the tools I had, patience, logic, and a meticulous attention to detail, to deconstruct the flimsy edifice of a petty tyrant's power. It turns out that a well-documented case, much like a well-designed bridge, can bear any weight you put on it. And Brenda's empire, built on a foundation of lies and intimidation, had the structural integrity of a house of cards in a hurricane. I just provided the wind.